Good morning. Hopefully everything is working okay. It looks as if it is all good. Good morning, Martin. Oh, I hope you're all right. Sounds sounds ominous. Yeah, hope you had hope your weekend wasn't too bad, mate. Right then, let's get going. We're on part 4 for the lymphatic system. I did have a feeling that it might take a few episodes to get through all of this. We're going to do a bit of a recap this morning of what we covered last week, and then add on the last lymphatic organs. Look at the spleen and the lymphatic nodules, so the follicles, which make up things like the tonsils and the adenoids, which you would have probably heard of. So we'll finish off with those, aiming to finish there today, and then next week, kind of do a recap of everything, and then the pathology. Okay, so when things go wrong and what to look out for. Goes a bit beyond what we normally do with learn anatomy, but I think what like I was saying last week, once you know what normal is, you can then see what's then abnormal. So it's easier to work out when there's a problem with things. So let's have a look at this. Hopefully that will come up. There we go. So we've got. Just get rid of that and bring that in. There we go. Lymphatic organs. This is where we were last week. So we were looking at these last week. We covered some of them already, and we're going to add on the last couple. So I'm going to little bit of a recap of the ones we did last week, and then finish off with the new ones. Good morning, Becky, and good morning, Tris. Hello, hello. Right then, let's get going. So this is where we were last time. So we had, excuse me, we were talking about primary and secondary lymphatic organs, and why they were called that, and where T cells and B cells come from. So the T cells were the thymus cells, and then the B cells, the bone cells. So that was kind of the reason they were given their name. It's what is commonly said, but the B cells are to do with embryology. I'm not going to go there. T cells and B cells we were looking at, and we were looking at where they originate from as stem cells. And I think Penny was saying that her mum had some stem cell treatment like 20 odd years ago. So it's not anything new. It has been around for a while, but it's becoming more and more widely used, widely available. And I mentioned that they're doing stem cell harvesting now in the US. Whether they're doing that over here, I don't know. I've no idea. I've not heard of it over here, but certainly something that's being pushed in the US at the moment. So it will probably come over here eventually. So we were looking at the primary lymphatic organs, site where stem cells divide and they become immunocompetent. So this is where they are able to mount an attack, basically, or an immune response. The primary lymphatic organs are the red bone marrow, so like here in the shaft of the bones, and you'll predominantly find that in flat bones and the epiphysis of long bones. Okay, so that's you in adults. So that's usually where you find your own red bone marrow, and red bone marrow produces all of these cells. Okay, and it's because it produces stem cells, and then they can differentiate and become whatever the body needs them to be. And then so these stem cells are so you've got immunocompetent B cells, and then pre-T cells. So they're like precursor cells. I think, yes, we've got a T cell and B cell here. It's not labeled them as precursor there, though. And the T cells then go to the thymus, and we were talking about this last week, to mature and learn their craft, basically. And then once they mature, they're then released back into the bloodstream and then float around the body and either work on things in the bloodstream or within the secondary organs, which we were talking about. So so the pre-T cells migrate to the thymus, and that's where they're trained up to become immunocompetent. Yeah, we were looking at that last time. And then secondary lymphatic organs. Now, this is where we were. So we looked at the lymph nodes last time. So again, we'll do a brief recap of those. And then we're going to have a look in a bit more detail at the spleen and the lymphatic nodules, just to finish off those secondary organs. Okay, so that's and then you've got all three then that have been explained. So the thymus, lymph nodes, and spleen are considered organs because they're surrounded by connective tissue capsule, and that's going to become evident as we go through the anatomy of those in a second. So obviously we've covered the thymus already last week. We've covered the lymph nodes. We're going to have a look at the spleen in a bit more detail today. So the thymus, not to be confused with the thyroid, which is just above it and looks very, very similar as well. It's split into two. So it's got a piece of connective tissue in the middle that holds the two lobes together. And then we've got these different parts of the thymus that do different things. So we've got a deeply staining outer cortex, so this area here, and then a lightly stained medulla in the middle. Okay. We've got a large number of T cells scattered, and then we started to talk about dendritic cells as well. So that's where the Greek came in, because dendrites mean tree-like, and these dendritic cells, they're like presenter cells. So they catch stuff, catch pathogens, and then present them to either T cells or B cells, and go, here you go, I found this. Doesn't look quite right. What do you reckon? And then the T cells and B cells then attack it if it needs attacking. Yes, yeah. So let me just put this up here. So T cells are created through our lives. Yes. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second, actually, about what happens to the thymus, because the T cells mature in the thymus, but the thymus shrinks with age. And gets replaced with fatty tissue. So the active part of the thymus as you get older decreases, but you will still get proliferation, so increases in numbers of T cells in the secondary organs, even in older age. Okay, so yes. Yeah, so I work with HIV clients where their count is low, so a little confused. Yeah, so yeah, we do, but obviously with we'll talk about HIV when we look at the pathology and what happens to the body. Yeah, it depends on their age, and also obviously with something like HIV, it's attacking the immune system, so you're going to be compromised basically if you have that virus. So yeah, so we've got immature T cells, so the ones that have come from the bone, that are pre-T cells, migrate from the red bone marrow to the cortex of the thymus, and then this is when they increase in number and begin to mature. So they're being trained up in the thymus. And there it is there. Okay, so it's in between the lungs, and kind of near the aorta, near the heart. And I think I mentioned last week that I was watching some videos of an anatomist, and obviously in the anatomy labs we usually see people that are in their 80s. So when they dissect the sternum and remove the sternum, they can't really find a thymus because it's just been replaced with fatty tissue. Okay, so in cadaveric specimens you don't really see it, but you would do if it was a younger cadaver. So these are the dendritic cells. So these are the ones with the like branches projecting out of them, and they're presenting pathogens to the T cells and the B cells. So yeah, dendritic cells and other parts of the body, such as lymph nodes, play a key role in the immune response. And where we are, yeah. So each of the specialized epithelial cells in the cortex has several long processes that surround and serve as a framework for as many as 50 T cells. Okay, so there's a lot of production of these T cells going on in the thymus. So the epithelial cells help educate the pre-T cells in the process of positive selection, And we mentioned that it was a bit like army recruits. So if they make the grade, then they're through and they're into the bloodstream. Off you go. If they don't make the grade, and for whatever reason they're not doing their jobs properly, they get booted out of boot camp. Okay, so and unfortunately in this case, they get eaten up by macrophages, which is another form of a white blood cell that clears up debris. Okay, so and I likened it to Pac-Man last time. So Pac-Man goes along and cleans up all the rubbish, basically. So T cells that don't mature and don't make the grade, that they get eaten. It's called phagocytosis, which I think it means eating and breaking down, something like that. So phago means to eat. So here we go. So here's your Pac-Man. And yeah, so we've got thymic macrophages. So these are specific for the thymus. They help clear out debris of dead and dying cells, and then the surviving T cells enter the medulla. Yeah, so if they're not making the grade, then they get cleared up. And then we've got all these different epithelial and dendritic cells, which we covered last week. So the T cells that leave the thymus via the blood migrate to the lymph nodes, which we looked at last week, the spleen, which we're going to look at this week, and then other lymphatic tissue, so lymphatic nodules, which again we're going to have a look at. And they colonize parts of these organs and tissues. So they kind of clump together to form the other lymphoid tissue. So things like lymph nodes are kind of clumping together so that they and we know that if there is an immune response, then they start to grow in size, and you can feel when your glands are up. Yeah, so that's what you get checked out at the doctors. Because of its high content of lymphoid tissue and a rich blood supply, the thymus has a reddish appearance in a living body. Okay, so it's highly vascularized, very similar to the spleen. Okay, so spleen is highly vascularized as well. And this is the change in the thymus. So I'm not going to go through all the text here, but in a young age, your body has a lot of learning to do about the environment that it's in. So the thymus is big and producing lots of T cells to respond to the pathogens that are coming into the body. And learning how to deal with those pathogens, remembering it, so that if they come in again during later life, then we've got the tools to deal with it. Okay, as we get older, the size of the thymus will shrink. It will get replaced with fatty tissue. So the weight doesn't change. Okay, it's still the same kind of weight, but the functional part of the thymus will reduce. Okay, so as you get older, it won't be as efficient. Okay, so yeah, down here, some T cells continue to proliferate in the thymus throughout an individual's lifetime, but this number will decrease with age. Okay, so that may be a factor with some of the people you're dealing with as well, Martin. Depends on their age as well. Cool. And then we looked at the lymph node. Excuse me for going through this quite quickly, but we did go through it in a lot of detail last week. Split into different regions, different areas. We've got nodes that are superficial and deep. Okay, so some that are close to the skin, some that are deeper in the body. And I showed you this, which was a dissection of a right front of the thigh. So you can see that region there. That's what this is. So you'll have ASIS up there somewhere. You'll have the pubic bone around here. All this yellow stuff is fat. Okay, that'll be subcutaneous fat. So the fat just underneath the skin. So you can see how superficial these structures are. Okay, especially around the inguinal area. And can you see the white stuff here and here? So that's all the superficial fascia that's covering the muscle tissue underneath. Okay, so your quads will be underneath there, rec fem, and vastus lateralis and whatnot. So if you peel back the skin, and then you'll be met with this layer of yellow fat tissue. And then if you take that away as well, then you'll get down to the superficial fascial layer. Okay. If you then cut through that and peel that back, you'll then get to the muscle tissue. So those are the kind of layers that are on display in this video, in this picture. So here are the veins. These have all obviously been coloured. I think I mentioned that last week, because they've got to be blue because they're veins, and then they've got to be green because it's lymphatics. They've been stained as well. But these are the lymph nodes all around here. Okay, so you can see where they all kind of clump together, and they congregate in certain areas around the body. The inguinal region, so the groin, behind the knee, so the popliteal area. You'll get them in around the breast tissue, the mammary area, and the axilla, so the armpit, plus the cubital fossa as well in the elbow. And there'll be less in some areas and more in others. Okay, and we were looking at why that was last week, I think. So yeah, the nodes split into compartments by connective tissue. So yeah, the connective tissue provides support and then a route for the blood vessels. So with all of this around here, so can you see the kind of white areas all around there? So that's all connective tissue. Yeah, so it wraps around it, but it also weaves into it as well. Okay. Yeah, it is. Yeah, that is really good. Yeah, it's usually that kind of stuff, especially if you get first years dissecting, that you kind of like take back the skin and then you're like, oh, there goes a lymph node. Okay, so it's you have to be really, really careful, and when you're dissecting, because it's so superficial, that particular region. I remember I know that because that was me when I was a first year. Yeah, they kind of looked in horror at some of my initial dissections. So the functioning part of the lymph node is divided into superficial and deep, superficial cortex and deep medulla. So you've got the cortex here and then the medulla here, and it's a bit like cleansing stations. So initially the lymphatic fluid will go through the cortex, outer, then inner, and then into the medulla, and then out. Okay, so that's the kind of flow. And we were talking about the motorway coming into a one or two lanes, so coming into a single carriageway or a dual carriageway. You've got the 5-lane highway, and then everybody's rushing, and then you then have to slow down to then go into the single lanes. So that's the same with this. So we've got several points at which the lymphatic fluid will get into the lymph node, but because there's only either one or two exit points, everything gets slowed down, which naturally, because of the anatomy, which allows the node to clean everything. Okay, so it slows everything down. If it's going through too quick, it would miss things. Yeah, that they'd speed past. Yeah, so we've got outer cortex, inner cortex in that region here, and then most lymphatic nodules in the outer cortex are secondary lymphatic nodules, which form in response to an antigen. Okay, so they're being created depending on what has entered the node. So they're being presented with a pathogen, and then they're adapting to that pathogen to kill it. Okay, so that's where that's happening. These are the sites of the plasma cells and the memory B cells, which again we talked about over the last couple of weeks. In fact, here we go. This was it. So you got your antigen here, your B cell, and then the antigen then activates that B cell, turns into a lymphoblast. So anything with blast is a building cell. Okay, and it's building based on the antigen that's come into it. Yeah, and then you'll either produce a B cell, which then creates loads of antibodies, or a memory B cell, which will remember that antigen for later. Okay, just in case we encounter it again. Yeah, so that's what's going on when we were talking about the how the B cell adapts. Okay, for some reason my keyboard's not working. There we go. Let's try that one. There you go. Move that out of the way. Yeah, so B cells recognize an antigen. The center of the secondary lymphatic nodule contains a region called the germinal center, and that is down here. There's a kind of lighter stained area just here. There we go, germinal center of lymphatic nodule. And the germinal center contains all of these, which we were talking about before. So B cells, dendritic cells, and macrophages. So we've got the dendrites presenting to the B cells going here. There's some kind of weird thing that's entered the lymph node. Go and deal with that. The B cell does its thing depending on what it needs to do. So either producing antibodies or memory cells. And then the macrophages will clean up any debris that's left behind. Okay. Yeah, here we go. So memory B cells persist after an initial immune response and remember having encountered a specific antigen. So if it comes back in again, then it can deal with it. Okay. Just see if there's anything else on there. Yeah, so the dendritic cells, again, they present to B cells and T cells, but in this particular case, T cells, causing their proliferation, so increases in number. And then the newly formed T cells then migrate from the lymph node to the areas of the body where the antigen has been activated. Okay, so it's like calling 999. Yeah, so you need some help. We'll get more people, call them up, and then they come to the area where the problem is, and they'll flood that area. It's all mainly chemical responses through the bloodstream, and those chemical responses, so the breakdown of an antigen will release chemicals, and then that chemical release will stimulate the immune response. Okay, it's really, really fascinating when you look at it. It makes me wish I'd studied immunology doing this because it is amazing. Cool. So we talked about that already, and then yeah, so it said, okay, remember this. So this was the flow of lymph from the blood. This was the first couple of sessions we did, and then the blood plasma leaks into the surrounding tissue. So that's into the interstitial spaces. Then when it goes into the lymphatic capillaries, it's then lymph, and then the lymphatic vessels, lymphatic ducts. So in between here and here, where it goes capillaries to lymphatic vessels, this is where your lymph nodes will be. Okay, so your cleaners, and there might be some more here as well. So you'll have several points along the lymphatic system where there will be cleaning sites to clean the lymph, to make sure that when it goes back into up into the thoracic duct, back into the bloodstream, it's all been filtered and cleaned. Okay, so that's where we are with that. So what happens is the lymph will come in through these areas here, and then each of these regions is numbered. And again, we went over these last time. So it goes through all of those numbers and then back out through here. So if we go back to this one, so if you imagine lymph going into the lymph node, so here, and then when it comes back out again, it goes into the lymph vessels. Okay, so where that arrow is, that's where you'll have a lymphatic node. Okay, or a lymph node, sorry. So yeah, lymphatic capillaries into the vessels, and you'll have a lymph node in between to filter everything out. Cool. Done that one. Good. Right, here we are. So spleen. This is where we got to at the end of last session. And if you're not sure where it is protected by your ribs on the left-hand side of your body. And I don't know if I've got a picture of that. It's called the hypochondriac area, a hypochondriac, not hypochondriac. And so it's just underneath the ribs on the left-hand side. And you can get something called splenomegaly, where the spleen gets, so megalo means big, or megalo. So splenomegaly means big spleen. And if there's some kind of pathology with it, where there's a massive proliferation of cells, it starts to grow diagonally across the intestines, and you can have some huge, massive spleens. So we'll look at that when we do the pathology. They can be huge, and obviously then pushing on other organs. and various reasons why that would happen. But we'll look at that next. Let's have a look at normal first. So yeah, the spleen sits in that kind of region on the left, and the position it's in is the reason why it has the shape it does. Okay, it also impacts on the other structures around it. Okay, so if we have a look here, so we've got, it's the largest single mass of lymphatic tissue in the body, so we know that it has an important role in cleaning, okay, and maintaining the immune system in our bodies. Good morning. No problem. No problem. Yeah, we've just done a recap. Okay, so yeah, don't worry. They will do, yeah, and obviously that will bring problems with it, and it's one of the things that they're really worried about as well. If you've been in some kind of car accident or something like that, or broken a rib, because it can puncture the spleen, and when we go through here, it is highly vascularized, so you've got lots of blood going into the spleen, and the spleen is full of blood. So if you injure it in some way, then it can just flood the abdominal cavity with blood. Okay, so and that can obviously be extremely dangerous. It's located in the, yeah, here we go, left hypochondriac area, okay, which is just underneath the ribs on the left hand side, so your left hand side, right as you look at someone, in the region between the stomach and the diaphragm. So it's tucked underneath the diaphragm and just to the side of the stomach. And this is why it gets its shape. So the superior surface of the spleen is smooth and convex. So that means it, I always remember concave, something's caving in. Okay, so convex is the opposite, where it's like a dome kind of shape. Okay, so the convexity, which is this area here, conforms to the concavity of the diaphragm. So because the diaphragm caves in like that, the spleen then molds to the shape of the diaphragm, and that's why it's the shape it is on the top. Okay, so yeah, that conforms to the diaphragm, but then neighboring organs make indentations on the visceral surface of the spleen. So the gastric impression, the stomach, so around this area here, the renal impression from the kidney on the left hand side, and then the colic impression from the large intestine. Okay, so the shape of the spleen is determined by the structures around it, and it kind of grows into that space. Yeah, and then this is really key. So through it passes the splenic artery, which is this one here, that one there. Obviously, it's red. Okay, and then the splenic vein, which is this one here, which is obviously blue, and then the efferent, so outward lymphatic vessels. Okay, so this is a bit different to what we've seen before. So we've got loads of blood coming in, loads of blood going out, and then also lymphatic fluid coming out as well. Okay, but not a route for it to come in. So stuff comes in via the bloodstream. So what the spleen will do is clean your blood. Okay, so where the lymph node will clean the lymphatic fluid, the spleen's main job is to clean your blood before it goes back via the splenic vein into the vena cava. Yeah, and if you think about the where the blood supply is around this kind of region, you've got the descending aorta, so the main oxygenated blood going down towards the legs. The splenic artery comes off of that. Okay, so that's pretty much really, well, very, very close to your heart. Okay, in terms of distance away from the aorta, so it's not far at all. So we've got a capsule of dense tissue all around it, so you can see all that, the kind of lighter pink stuff on this image. And then a trabeculi, which means a small beam. So we've got these kind of folds coming in here, and they extend inward from the capsule. So there's the capsule, there's the trabeculi. In fact, I'm in the way of that. There we go. And then the capsule plus trabeculi, the reticular fibers, which is the kind of makeup of the connective tissue, fibroblast cells. So these are fibrotic tissue building cells. They constitute what's called the stroma, which is the cover. Stroma means bed cover of the spleen. Okay, so all the surrounding tissues, all kind of fibrotic connective tissue. The parenchyma is the functional tissue in the middle. So all of this bit, all the kind of squishy bits, yeah. And there's two different bits. We've got white pulp and we've got red pulp. Okay, so the white pulp is lymphoid. So, and if we see where it's located as soon as that splenic artery comes in. So as soon as the blood supply comes down from the aorta into the spleen, and then the spleen then receives that blood, cleans it all. Okay, that's its job. So if we have a look at that on a microscopic level, so we've got white pulp is lymphatic tissue, mostly lymphocytes, so white blood cells, and then macrophages, Pac-Man, coming along cleaning everything. So that's these bits here. Where are we? That's on the wrong bit actually. So that's that bit just there. So this is your blood vessel coming in, okay, and this is the white pulp just there. So that arrow should extend just a little bit further into there. The red pulp consists of blood-filled venous sinuses and cords of splenic tissue. Okay, so splenic cords. The splenic cords consist of red blood cells, macrophages, lymphocytes, plasma cells, and granulocytes. Okay, within the white pulp, so this area here, so as soon as the blood supply comes in, you've got B cells and T cells carrying out immune functions similar to the lymph nodes. Okay, so as it comes in here, you'll get the lymphatic tissue here will clean the blood. Okay. So B cells, T cells carry out immune functions similar to the lymph node, while spleen macrophages destroy blood-borne pathogens by phagocytosis, so eating the cells, okay, eating the debris. Cool. So within the red pulp, so this section here, although it's yellow on this image, that's the red pulp. What these do, so the spleen performs three functions related to the blood cells. They remove macrophages that have been ruptured or worn out. Okay, so now what we've got is a transfer of all the debris and all the rubbish from the lymphatic activity into the veins to take that back and be pumped to be cleaned again. Okay, so it's you've got several points at which everything is being cleaned. We've got storage of platelets, and this is really key. So 1/3 of the body's supply of platelets is in the spleen. Yeah, so that's why an injury to the spleen is really quite significant. We've also got production of blood cells, so hemopoiesis during fetal life. So that's how a baby in the womb will produce its red blood cells. So masses of jobs that the spleen does that are really, really important for our immune function and during fetal life as well. Cool. Where are we at? Perfect. Good. I have to look up at the time and I'm like, oh, actually, we've got a bit of time. So hopefully that all makes sense so far. We've got no questions yet, so hopefully it's not like stunned silence. This is the last bit, okay, of the anatomy of the lymphatic system. So we've got lymphatic nodules, so not nodes, not lymph nodes, but lymphatic nodules, sometimes called follicles. Okay, so they are very different. We'll have a look at the structure of them now. So nodules are masses of lymphatic tissue that are not surrounded by a capsule. So that's how we differentiate them in terms of the anatomical structure. Okay, they're scattered throughout the lamina propria, which is connective tissue of the mucous membranes. So stuff that is a bit gooey, basically mucousy stuff. So we've got the gastrointestinal tract, the urinary and reproductive tracts, and then the respiratory airways. So those three key areas are where these lymphatic nodules will reside. Okay, so this is where they live. Lymphatic nodules in these areas are often referred to as mucosa-associated lymphatic tissues, or MALT. Okay, so a bit different in structure to lymph nodes because of that there's no capsule. Same with the spleen. The spleen has got a capsule. There's no capsule with these. Okay, so this is why they're differentiated. So this is in the gastrointestinal tract, and there's something called Peyer's patches, which are this area here. So this is microscopic view of them. So these are the villi of your intestinal walls. So let's take you back to GCSE biology. Remember that talking about stretching out the small intestine, and you'll be able to wrap it around the world or whatever it is. And it's because of the folds in the villi, the microvilli, and so as things float around in your small intestines, the increase in surface area that's created by the villi means that there's a bigger absorption of whatever it is that you need. Remember, we were saying as well, though, that fats can't get absorbed in this region, so they migrate into the lymphatic vessels and then go via the thoracic duct into the bloodstream that way. Okay, so that's quite interesting, I thought. But we've also got a masses of lymphoid tissue, so to mount an immune response if there's pathogens coming through here as well. So we've got a protective measure in the gastrointestinal walls, and yeah, like I say, called Peyer's patches. So although many lymphatic nodules are small and solitary, some occur in multiple large aggregations, so kind of groups all clumped together in multiple large aggregations in specific parts of the body. So these are the tonsils in the pharyngeal area, so around the throat and at the back of the nose, by the tongue as well. And then we've got the aggregated or groups lymphatic follicles, so the Peyer's patches in the ileum of the small intestine. Okay, so we've got the duodenum, if I can remember, the jejunum, and then the ileum. Okay, blimey, it's been a long time since I've talked about those. So the duodenum is the first bit of the small intestine, then the jejunum, I think it's jejunum, so with loads of J's, Jejunum, something like that, jejunum. And then the ileum is the last bit of the small intestine before it goes into the large intestine. So we've got these Peyer's patches that will protect the large intestine. Okay, so on that last bit of the journey, aggregation of lymphatic nodules also occur in the appendix, which again is like that kind of little projection off of the just around that join of the ileum and the large intestine. If you've had appendicitis, you'll know exactly where that is. Cool. Okay, so this is where your tonsils are located. And it's mad because I had my tonsils out when I was a kid and my adenoids. And do you know what? But before I started looking at this, I mean, I knew where the palatine tonsils were, but I had no idea where the adenoids were. And I mean, mine are in a jar somewhere. I've been chucked out. Yeah, it's mad, isn't it? So you have these operations done, and actually, I've never even looked at where they were. So it's been useful for me this week as well. So usually there are 5 tonsils which form a ring at the junction of the oral cavity, so around this region here, the oropharynx, and at the junction of the nasal cavity and the nasopharynx, so where the nose meets the pharynx. The tonsils are strategically positioned to participate in immune responses against inhaled or ingested foreign substances. And clearly, when I was a kid, it was a bit too activated, and I had tonsillitis all the time. So they took them out. So here we go. So we've got the single pharyngeal tonsil or adenoid, and that is here, just up there. Okay. So here's your nose, and then so it's at the back of the nose, around that nasopharyngeal region, just there. So any kind of pathogens that are inhaled will be caught in the adenoids before they go down into the pharynx. So the 2 palatine tonsils lie at the posterior region of the oral cavity. So that is these 2. Okay, and if you've got kids and they're complaining of sore throat, you get them to say "ah" like they're doing the doctors, and then you can see the tonsils up. My daughter had tonsillitis a little while ago, and they were proper red with spots on. You're like, right, you need to go to the docs. So you can clearly see them when there's a problem. You shouldn't really see them when there isn't one. Okay, so they're quite obvious when there is an issue. So those are the palatine tonsils, one either side, and they're the tonsils commonly removed in a tonsillectomy. So those are the ones usually taken out. And then we've got lingual tonsils located in the base of the tongue. So that's here, just there. Okay, so we've got palatine. So it's kind of like a gateway, isn't it? But before things are enter into your down into the esophagus. So we've got anything coming in through the mouth that's a pathogen is going to get caught by these palatine tonsils or the lingual tonsils. Anything coming in through the nose is caught by your adenoids. Okay. Yeah, and the lingual tonsils may also require removal during tonsillectomy. Obviously, depends on the individual. Cool. Perfect timing today. Good. Managed to cover everything. Good, good, good. So that is all of the anatomy for the lymphatic system. That's a good question. Why do you get those tonsil stones? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you mean by that, but I'll have a look for you and I'll find out. I'm not an expert in this area, I'm afraid, so I'll have to do a bit of research on that. What could have what would that have made a difference with COVID having tonsils removed? Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah, definitely. I think because I now have done in the past used to suffer with a lot of sinusitis, and I think it's because my first line of defence has been removed. So any kind of infection then spreads up, and I used to get really terrible sinusitis, and I'm pretty sure that that's one of the reasons why, because of that. And yeah, so I think if that first line of defence isn't there, and it's an airborne pathogen, then yeah, it will reduce your ability to identify that as soon as it's coming into the body. So it will be picked up by other lymphatic tissue or lymphoid tissue, but it will be further down the line. So it will be in your body, further in your body than if you've had that line of defense. Yeah, cool. That was really good. Well, I thought hopefully you found it good. I've really enjoyed putting all these together actually over the last 4 weeks. So we've got one more week to go. Kind of recap everything from the anatomy side, and then we'll add on the pathology next week. So we'll have a look at HIV, Martin, and yeah, there's some other conditions that affect some of the other lymphatic organs and the lymphatic fluid itself. Okay, so we'll have a look at all of those and why it occurs. Okay, cool. I will see you next week at 10 o'clock. And any questions in the meantime, pop them in the group and I'll answer them next week. So I'll go searching for tonsil stones and then I'll pop the answer in the group. Okay, see you in a bit.